First of all, if you don't know it by now, this governor gets it. He understands how important the working landscape is to this state. Before I took this job, and before I said yes, and before he said yes to me, he made sure I took a trip about 40 miles south, or 30 miles south, to meet a guy who I'd never met before. Well, actually I did meet him once before, but I'd kind of forgotten because we're talking beer instead of talking work. And that was Lawrence Miller. The governor wanted to make sure that Lawrence Miller and Chuck Ross knew each other, understood each other before we started to work together, because he understood the connection between the economy and commerce in the field of agriculture. And when I talked to the governor about the field of agriculture, he understood the connection and the importance of agriculture to forestry. And so it's not any surprise to me that in my job as the Secretary of Agriculture, two of the people I work with most closely are Mike Snyder, the Commissioner of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, and Lawrence Miller, the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. That's because this governor gets it. He understands the connections between all the work that he's charged us with doing. And many of you have watched the evolution of the Working Landscape Enterprise Board and the fund. And you may have even paid attention to the politics that led up to its creation. Politics that were led by many of you being part of the coalition, the assembly of a leadership team put together by Paul, led by Roger Albee. And you may have noticed how hard you had to push to make this happen. To get a program, the first and only new program in the Shumlin administration, started. And that's because the governor wasn't going to stand here just because it was a good idea and say yes. He made sure he put all of us through our paces. So we pushed and honed and thought and rethought and calibrated and recalibrated what it is we're trying to do here. He didn't just say, oh yeah, I got Lawrence and I got Mike and I got Chuck and we'll just let them run amok. We'll give them some money and we'll let them see what they can do. He said, no, you folks need to prove to me and prove to the people of the state that this program is worthwhile and it's going to be an investment worthy of your tax dollars, worthy of your time. Because he understands how important these kinds of investments can be to the jobs we create in this state from our working landscape, to the communities those jobs support from our working landscape, and ultimately to the culture of this state and all it's connected to. Because the people, in my estimation and his, the people who work in the farms, the foodies who work in the processing, the restaurants, and the people who work in forestry do hold the soul of the state in their working hands when they work 95% of the ground that we walk on and call home in Vermont. It's that reason that I'm pleased to introduce a governor who gets it, Governor Peter Shumlin.
Thank you so much, Secretary Chuck Ross, and thanks Phil Conway, Mr. President, for hosting us today. Thanks to Paul Costello and his extraordinary work that he's doing, and to the entire Working Lands Board that's working so hard for us. I also want to give a huge shout out to all the folks in this room. You know, it's pretty unbelievable that we can fill the hall here at BTC with folks who are making what I call the most extraordinary transformation in locally grown food, forest products, and agricultural value-added product, I believe, in the history of all of the 50 states. You are leading the way. Let's give you a hand for being here this morning. And you know, you're doing the hard work out there making this happen, but there's a lot of folks who are backing us up I'm lucky to be a governor who happens to have, there are 50 of us, but I got the best congressional delegation in America, bar none. And they're helping us get the resources to make this magic happen too. So a huge shout out to Senator Patrick Leahy, Senator Bernie Sanders, Congressman Peter Welch, represented by Tom Berry, Tricia Coates, and Jenny Nelson here today. Thank you so much. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my team, because a governor is only as good as the people they're lucky enough to appoint. And I got to say, I got a lot of secretaries here because this is a joint effort, as you know. So I'm very grateful to Secretary Chuck Ross, also to former Secretary Roger Albee, who helped set the foundation for much of the work that we're celebrating today. But also to Chuck, to my job secretary Lawrence Miller, to my A&R secretary Deb Markowitz, who I know is here, as well as my commissioners Mike Snyder, Forest and Parks, who's done an extraordinary job of leading a rebirth in the forest products industry, Megan Smith, who gets the connection between tourism, food, ag, forestry products, and so to all of them, stand up and give me a hand because you're doing a great job. Come on, Chuck, Lawrence, Mike, Megan. So when I see Senator Dick McCormick in the back there, we don't usually get him out at a gathering this early in the morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Listen, I just want to say a few words before I talk a little bit about where we're headed, about how extraordinary this transformation is for an old-timer like me that's actually born and raised in Vermont. I think the first governor that grew up here in a long time. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, because I think sometimes when we celebrate the progress we're making, and most importantly, as we're going to do today, better define the progress that we still have to make, we sometimes forget to look back. And I can tell you that when I was a kid growing up in Windham County, if you had asked folks to get together outside of the dairy industry, which was strong at that time, but outside of the dairy industry, to talk about how we were going to take local products, turn them into the best value-added products grown and produced anywhere in the world, and talk about how we can make more of them, we could have met in a phone booth, literally. And that wasn't that long ago. I remember when my friend Bobby Gray, who I admired greatly, and his wife, Kim Mumford, now Kim Gray, decided they were making maple syrup in my backyard, back in the house where I grew up, and they said to me one day, well, we're gonna move up north somewhere, anything north of Dulles Falls was up north somewhere to a southern kid, and we're gonna start growing vegetables and selling them out of a farm stand in the back of wherever we're growing. And I don't know why we called it truck farming, but we did. They were going to be truck farmers because, frankly, the biggest thing you could sell it out of in those days was a truck. And, we all thought that we were seeing Bob and Kim saying farewell to them to go and starve somewhere. Let's just be candid about this. Now, if you go down to Four Corners Farm, down in Newberry, South Newberry, you see this vibrant, beautiful, extraordinary food-creating center that employs dozens and dozens of people in the growing season and lots of people when they're not growing, when they're not selling out of the barn. That was one of the first examples for a lot of farmers here, I bet, and other folks who wanted to grow vegetables about how to do it and how to make it work. It became a model, what I call the pioneer. The other pioneers I remember was Jack and Karen Mannix down in Brattleboro, who took over their third generation farm. Now I can tell you when their grandparents ran it, we used to stop there and buy 5 or 7 cents a gallon gas because there was a gas pump outside, and there might occasionally be a few cucumbers or a couple of tomatoes or a few things that you could buy from the garden, and they had a few cows, and like everyone in those years, they were diversified farmers, but there wasn't a lot of bounty. Now, anyone that's been down to the Walker Farm in the last 5 or 10 or 15 years, you know, you wouldn't have thought that that would have been possible. But there they are, employing dozens and dozens of hardworking farmers in the summertime and making money, growing vegetables right there on Route 5, where their grandparents struggled to do the same thing. And guess what? The kids that started working for Jack and Karen 30 years ago, when people thought they were a little bit crazy to be doing this, along with Bobby and Kim, they're now running their own farms and their own operations. And it's growing, and it's spreading, and it's creating jobs, and it's making money. But most importantly, it's preserving Vermont's quality of life and quality of community. It is the heart of who we are, and it's moving across this state from the Massachusetts border to the Canadian border, east to west. Every year it's gaining momentum. Now, if you had said when I was growing up in Vermont, you know, the time is going to come in your lifetime where we are competing with the French in winning awards for our cheese because our cheese is better than theirs, you'd have thought that was crazy. I can remember when I was serving with Don Hooper here in the house years and years ago, and he told me that his wife Allison had just come back from France a few years earlier, and she was going to make Camembert and other good cheeses right here, just as good as the French. I thought Don was smoking something that's now legal in Colorado and Washington State, but not in Vermont. Another value-added product. So, my point is this. As we talk about what we're doing and what we're focused on growing, let's remember, we have come a long, long way in an extraordinarily short period of time. And every month, there are more young people in Vermont who are making cheese, who are making caramel from goat's milk, who are making some value-added product like Bill Shore is from everything that you can create from an apple, who are creating forest product value-added energy, as Chris Brooks is in Clarendon when he makes a pellet that employs 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 foresters and keeps that money from going to Saudi Arabia, but creates green power and energy right here in Vermont. Or the guy on my dairy farm who came to me 5 years ago and said, I'm bringing in a lumber mill, one of those portables. I want to start making good, really good, high quality Vermont lumber and selling it right here. 5 years later, he's employing 4 people full-time on that land. Or the dairy farmer who got trained right here at VTC just a few years ago and took over the little dairy farm that I'm lucky enough to own in Westminster, West Vermont, 7th generation farm. And he met a girl here, a young woman. She was smart enough to move from New Hampshire to Vermont, go to school here. And they're now down, just this month, took the farm organic. And they're making money growing milk. My point is, we are just warming up. We are just figuring this out. And as you travel around the country, this happens to me often when I talk to other governors, other folks, and people start to figure out what we're doing here, they ask, how are you doing this? And what can we do to replicate it? And I want to say that it's the vision of the Vermont Council on Rural Development, Paul Costello, the board who works so hard on these grants, the smartness of the legislature to join me. This is the first new program that has been funded under the Shumlin administration because we're dead broke. But we felt it was important enough to make this happen, and we're going to keep it happening. Because what these grants do is fuel the transformation in the way we grow food, the quality of the food, the way we grow lumber and get the value-added product for our forest lands, and the way we maintain our working landscape for my kids, for your kids, and for future generations, where the best ag and forest product days are ahead of us, not behind us in this state, and where we continue to show the other 49 how we maintain our health and our quality of life by growing great food, by making great wood products, by ensuring that our working landscape defines who we are and allows us to maintain our quality of life because of it. So that's what this is about today. A huge shout out to the board who spent countless hours getting this right. It's hard to come up with the money. It's even harder, much harder, to wade through the hundreds and hundreds of applications that they got for the scarce resources we'd allocated and get it right. Get it right. Allocate the dollars to the folks that would result in both ag, food, and forestry jobs as local operations grew because they could invest in infrastructure they otherwise couldn't afford it. So listen, I've talked too long. Let's keep it up. We're just warming up. I'm incredibly proud of the work you're doing. Thanks to Paul Costello and the team for pulling this together. Thanks for the Working Land Board for making the selections and doing all the hard work they were doing. And let us remember that while we're getting this right and we're doing well, we cannot let our foot off the pedal. This is one of the greatest transformations in Vermont, strengthening our communities, strengthening our quality of life, strengthening our families, and creating jobs because we're out innovating the rest of them. Go for it. Thank you so much.